Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the International Schools Podcast. I'm your co-host, John Mickton. Dan is off on holiday because in this time span, it's kind of in the Western Hemisphere or the Northern Hemisphere, it's the spring holiday. So he is taking his children off for a holiday. We've had quite a few requests about this idea about agentic AI and agents, and I'm sure all of you have been reading about them. Some of you might be actually trying them. If you're using one of the large language models, there are different versions of these agents. And of course, there was a lot of talk about Claudebot, and that got a lot of press. And so really what has kind of happened is before we were asking questions to AI and it was responding. And now AI is doing things and we're kind of shifting to checking what did it do? Where did it go? What did it produce? I'm going to look at this. Am I comfortable with this? And then also we're giving it some permissions. So you might be letting it connect to different applications that you use, might be your Microsoft ecosystem, might be your Google ecosystem. It could be your social media. And the idea of agentic AI is this shift where now we have the capacity to subcontract out some tasks and give it a good prompt. So we say, we would like you to summarize all my emails and do a bunch of draft emails, responding them, and maybe categorize them by urgent, important to not important. And then you get a notification and you can go and look at all the work that it's done, and you can either approve or you might want to even edit that. That's just a very simple example where that can be helpful. What's interesting is it starts doing some of the heavy lifting, especially for that kind of administrative work that is often time consuming. Reading 32 emails, responding to each one, trying to understand, especially if you have multiple responses, that takes time. And as we know, time is precious. And if we can subcontract things off, that's of course really interesting. There is a double-edged sword to that. There's also this idea of cognitive offloading, where some of the thinking now we're subcontracting off. And what does that mean about our own capacity to think? Or are we now focusing on different types of thinking where we're not really focused on the administrative and kind of what I would say the workflows, the heavy lifting, or some of that? Anyway, I think it's a very interesting situation. We're in a transition. You see a lot of businesses starting to talk about it. There's talk and hype about unemployment. These agents are going to get everybody's job. There's a lot out there. There's a lot of hype, as there would be. And there's a lot of positives. And of course, with anything that's positive, there's also the negatives. And how do you balance both of those? So we thought it would be really helpful to bring on two guests that are working with agentic AI, but also bringing some skepticism, bringing some cautions, because of course there's security risks. And when you're with a team, everybody's going to be at a different entry point on how they accept this, how comfortable they are to do that. So I'm really excited to, first of all, introduce Adam Morris, who's the Product Director Integration at Faria Education Group. And I think many of our audience members know Adam because he does some amazing work supporting schools around the world with ManageBac and OpenApply. He has a teaching background. He's been a technology director and really brings a grounded approach to international education. And definitely go to the show notes because you can catch him on his website. And you, of course, can follow him on LinkedIn. With him is William Faure, is the founder of Resonant Information Systems, who are based in Taipei, Taiwan. And he has also been very much involved in enterprise scale platforms, ensuring administrative system support. And the core mission of teaching and learning really has been the work that he's doing to making sure that technology doesn't bring the status quo. He brings deep technical proficiency as a software engineer, but also a lot of experience in the education field. And he is the former CEO of Taipei European School. So both of you, Adam and William, a very warm welcome to the International Schools Podcast.
Hi, John. Thanks for inviting me. I'm a long-time listener as well, so it's a blast to be on.
Great. So we are going to kick off, and I'm going to ask Adam, In simple terms, what would you tell somebody agentic AI is? What can it do now for AI tools that it couldn't do, say, a year ago?
Right. So, and in the simple terms, I think maybe it's best to, with my classroom background, my classroom teacher background, it's actually in English. So I'll use a closed exercise. This is an analogy. In the previous, working with LLMs previously, it was really good at helping me to write these kinds of exercises that you might use in a classroom. So, fill in the blanks. You give it, maybe you give it an article, and it's really good at selecting which words that are good to test the student with, some explanations, and it will be really great at that kind of task. Whereas now, it's essentially being able to ask the LM to not just design a activity, but can be almost like another colleague, another English teacher who has some experience, some background and experience, and as you're able to delegate to it, you have a whole course that you want to deliver, and what are the series of activities that can be done, and design them. And so it's a lot more, it's like we often say, it's often more about doing a lot more than just one-off prompting. Like when ChatGPT in November 2022 came out, it was you would have a kind of an experience where you're trying to prompt engineer your way through to get the result you're looking for. But now it's more about setting goals, building context, and being very explicit about what goals you're trying to accomplish. And it's very good at reading what the intention is and producing results that are consistent with if you had been the person doing it yourself. So I think that's probably a way to put it. I think a bigger milestone event is the invention of Claude Code and similar tools than when OpenAI released ChatGPT to great fanfare. We all kind of remember the first time we all experienced using an LLM the first time, but this seems to be a different stroke of invention entirely.
I think what's really interesting is the way you describe it as an assistant, but actually an equal assistant, and that it can actually now produce. So it can make slide decks, it can create code. So it can actually produce content and artifacts that maybe before we were interacting with, as I understand. And I think that is a huge shift in that context. William, you're already using AI tools and large language models in your work, and I know we've got to talk before. What is working well now, and maybe what makes you more skeptical when people are moving to this agentic AI?
So maybe to better explain what might be the issues with agentic AI, maybe I will first talk about what I'm doing that works really well with LLMs in general. So I can I can say, well, I started like everybody prompting and playing with LLMs, but at the moment, at this stage, professionally and personally, basically, yes, it's I use it as a partner, and most of the times I would use it as a brainstorming partner. So it's really important that you think about the discussion with the LLM system as a discussion about something you already know about, but also you want a new perspective sometimes. There are some things that you won't think about, and by prompting the LLM, it will come up and it will say, oh, a lot of aha moments come from prompting and discussing with the LLM. There's a lot of added research. So when you are not sure about what you are looking for, sometimes you can use it to aid you in the research. So basically it will look for information on the internet. But the point is it will understand something that you might not be expressing very precisely, and retrieve some references for you to look at and summarize. that goes to the second kind of use that I have, which is the solving the needle in the haystack problem and summarizing information. So very often I have to work on specifications that are absolutely huge, and it goes back to time management. Do I have time to read the entire thing? No. Could I? Yes. But sometimes there's a better use of my time than reading the whole thing when I actually am interested in just one part of it. And it's really good at extracting the part that I explain it that I need, and then phrase it in a very succinct way that then I can use when I develop applications. And I use it basically as an assistant for software engineering. You would have only a limited resource of time, and you have to decide how much time you need to spend on which tasks. And there are a lot of tasks in engineering that actually are not worth spending too much time, but unfortunately use a lot of your time. And it's really, really good at producing boilerplate, but also sometimes quite clever pieces of code that you can then review and inject into your main system that you are building. And lastly, I think it's also good to use it as a knowledge partner, where you have an already existing pool of knowledge, but you are interested in something that is slightly outside of your domain. So you're not asking about something completely new, because then it's very easy to be misinformed. But you are asking about something that you are not really comfortable with. To give you an example, I do a lot of software engineering, but I do very little about networking. And of course, I know more about networking than somebody who is not in IT, but very little compared to somebody who is actually in networking. And I used it several times to help me, guide me in some setup that was necessary for some of my software. And then, of course, again, you need to triple check whatever is proposing, especially when you have multiple interactions with the model. But it's a really great knowledge partner in that sense. It will bring the piece that is missing in your knowledge pool.
I think what's really important that you're bringing up, William, is this idea of knowledge partner, because you did give the example of the networking. Oh, you know a fair amount about networking, but you're not an expert. And how important it is when you're interacting with large language models that you're interacting in areas of your expertise, so you can also check and double check. And maybe it might go a bit left of field and something that you didn't think about, but you can make that connection with your knowledge and your understanding and your expertise, which is really important. I'm assuming the way you're describing it, you're always at the front and center of that relationship. You're giving the ideas, you're checking everything. Your skepticism, is it more suddenly subcontracting that out and letting something do it, and you come back 2 hours later and it delivers it? Is that where your skepticism is?
Yes. So to be entirely completely clear about where the skepticism would reside, the idea of agentic AI and agents, using LLMs, is not something completely new. I've been playing for a long time with tools that LLMs can trigger. So basically, you ask for something, and then it goes to find the web page. But it can go much further if you host the model. Then you can ask it to look for information on your own system. And Adam will have way more examples of how useful that is in your everyday workflows. So that's super, super useful. And the way it works is by discussing with itself and planning and orchestrating what should be done, what's the best way to do it. Normally, until now, you would be doing that yourself with the LLM. You would be discussing that, and then you would take actions or let it take action, but you would be part of the conversation. What's happening now is that agents are built so that this can be internalized. This can happen under the hood, and you don't need to worry too much about that. And it will take actions based on its internal orchestration of actions, internal assessment of what should be done and what's the best way to do it. So that's the part that is a little worrying. The fact that it's super efficient, but for the sake of efficiency, the human is taken out of the discussion loop.
And I think that's a great way of explaining it. And I think that's where a lot of people, and you know, where the hype goes, oh, the agents are going to take over the world. We have no idea what we're doing. And I'm sure many of our audience listeners know about Claudebot, that then they created their own Reddit-like discussion board, and there was all kind of very weird topics happening. I think your point's an important one, is that distinction is where suddenly you don't know what's going underneath the hood. And I love the way you said that before there were agents, but you were always under the hood with it. In other words, you were the partner, you knew it delivered, you checked, and now we basically press a button, off it goes, and suddenly comes back, and you actually have no idea how it made this or what it did. I mean, I'm simplifying. So I would like to transition to Adam, because I know, Adam, you work for Faria Education Group, and you have developers, and you work at an industrial scale. You have many, many schools. You support many schools, and you yourself work very closely with IT directors and coordinators, and your team is really instrumental in making sure these systems work. What today, give us an example where Agentic AI has clearly improved your workflow compared to something that you did before, it kind of like the before and after, and you don't have to share any state secrets.
Sure, yeah. Thanks, John. Yeah. So actually, William and I actually met through my work. We're hosting it's kind of a developer advocacy forum for customers of various systems, and William was one of the principal contributor. So yeah, we have a lot of connection points. But one of the things that's different from me and William is that I'm no longer in a school. He's in a very complex school with IT is an essential part of the functioning there. Whereas at Faria, I'm a product director. So that means I'm supervising roadmaps, and I'm supervising conversations between customers and negotiating expectations across the teams and things like that. And so what makes me Mr. Hype Man when it comes to AI, and this is not a natural position for me to be in. I've been through many hype cycles with different technologies, and I was always very cautious and wanting to take it slow. And when around November is when the industry started, coming out with the kind of bleeding edge wise. It was starting to become this agentic stuff became super exciting, and I just I was busy. But then around like mid-January, I started getting into it, and then I was blown away because what it meant. This is the difference it makes. Whereas before it was there's something called software development lifecycle. Whereas before it meant reading emails, getting requests, studying, doing research spikes on what the to-be state of the feature request need is expresses in the to-be state. But there's the as-is state as it is now. So let's say you have a request on ManageBac where it's something like a report that builds out a particular kind of view. And so when you're building that kind of when you're building as a product director, you're trying to prepare your development team to work on it. There's just a lot of paperwork. There's just a lot of unknown things to quantify. So what I started doing was using Claude Code to help me do the research spikes. And I was using Claude Code to look at the code base, using Claude Code to look at my email and for a summary of what was being requested. And so whereas that was all before very manual, what I was doing was to do this, what you have to do is you create these agents that I'm telling it what to do with natural language, what this agent should do. And what's happened, the difference that's made is it's compacted my role, which used to be spread out across many facets, and having to delegate it to other people. I could actually start to do it, many of those functions right in one sitting. So things like the research spike, which I would have to ask the developer, say, what about this report? How possible is it? How feasible is it? How complex is it? It would come back to me. The Claude Code could just analyze the code base and come back with information that would match what I would expect from a senior developer. And so this is the difference. This is a computer science world that I live in. I'm not, this is not a subjective opinion area or soft skills. This is hard skills. So with that caveat, this is why I think this is very important for schools to understand what the technology means. It means that there's going to be a lot more software because it's so much easier to make. Writing code is now table stakes for retail users like teachers, coordinators. Everyone's empowered now to be able to write personal software, which is really what's the difference.
And when you are doing this work, so in other words, now you've kind of subcontracted some of the heavy lifting. You mentioned the research component, or can we build the code, or does this code work? Would you say that now developers, they are subcontracting out some of the design of the code at the base level, kind of at the beginnings, and then whatever Claude produces, then your team looks at it and checks that it makes sense, and then maybe interacts with it more? Am I describing that process correctly? And then just tied to that, that must really allow much more time to do other things.
Yeah, so basically the non-technical professionals are now able to be more technical. But on the flip side, the already technical colleagues are losing control, so to speak. They're becoming more like a supervisor, whereas before they were handcrafting artisans of writing the writing software. So they're getting further away from the code base than they were, whereas in the non-technical, are getting closer to it and being more technical, because Claude Code or these Agentic, these harnesses, we call them, facilitate being able to understand that the cognitive load has lowered to such an extent that someone doesn't know code, doesn't understand how to write code or read it, but can build software directly onto professional, like services that we have, or their own websites, or their own tools that they want to make.
So, William, when you hear Adam talking about, how these tools are genuinely helpful in his context, where do you still see limits? Where are you still seeing weak points? Because I think it's, I just want to tell to our listeners, I just love that we have two different perspectives, because so often we just come with one voice. And when we were talking, that was something that I really appreciated about William, was the more skepticism, not as a naysayer, but making us think deeper. So William, what are maybe some things that you still see limits? Because Adam just described something that's quite, I don't know much about this, and I'm thinking, that's amazing.
Yeah. So first of all, there were a lot of improvements in the way the models generate code. Like, it's gigantic, the difference between a couple of years ago and now. So it can produce code that actually works and that can follow specifications. The issue with that is, again, more on the human level before it goes into the model and after it comes out from the model. You have a wonderful machine that can generate a really good artifact. But before that, in your workflow, you need to make sure that the specifications are well written, and a lot of the institutional knowledge, or the things that that are natural, but you never take time to write it down because that's so obvious for you, that needs to be as part of the input you give to the agent who will write code and modify your files and see where things need to be improved. So that's the most difficult part. When you start and you build boilerplate or software or like mock examples of what can be generated by the model, you never have this problem. But in real life projects, you will have to maintain those specifications. And to be honest, that's something that everybody should do in the first place, agents or not. We should keep track of the decisions that were made, why they were made, the architectural decisions, and also the process decisions, the workflow decisions. So they should be there. So it's a good lesson. Now we are facing our limits and we need to improve on the input. And then there's the output, where you get a piece of code that is, generally speaking, really good, but it's extremely rare to get something that is good enough. And you will need even more skillful engineer to review code that was written by somebody else. So as Adam said, now the skills are transferred to another area, and you need even more skills for those who are still doing engineering if they get to receive code that was generated and not written by them. So there's this gap that needs to be handled. So that's difficult. But I really like the idea of us realizing finally that actually since the beginning, we should have written specifications for everything we do, and now we realize how important it is.
Yeah, in the context of these agentic AI, I think that's a really interesting point that you bring in. I think also that just highlights how much importance there is to having the human in the loop, that always kind of being involved in critical thinking and overlooking that. So thank you, William. I really appreciate that perspective. Adam, there's a lot of hype around this, and people say it's a game changer. And you hear that, don't teach coding anymore because agents can code. But I think William is telling us actually now coders have to be even more skillful in this area because of what is being outputted by agents, example like Claude Code. In your view, what makes agentic AI even more than just another tool? Because you've talked about hype cycles. All three of us have gone through many different hype cycles. If you think when the internet came out, and then we had Google, and then suddenly we had the iPod, and even softwares, shopping carts, etc. What, in your opinion, and in the context of working in a global international technology company that supports thousands of schools around the world, why is this more than just a productivity tool?
Right. So I would share some of what William was saying about making sure that you documented what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I share some of the skepticism about, especially when it comes to student data, unlike other industries, like say for banks, we probably don't want our software companies to be like really going really fast, and at least that's my one person's opinion. So there's a shared skepticism about like, is automatically creating software for schools a good idea? Do we want to stay a part of the creation process more than just a supervisor? We have to define our goals and things. But at the same time, when I've seen the power of what it's meant to the change in our process and conversations internally and across the other podcasts that I listen to, around January or so, everyone started saying you need to start using this tool. This is amazing, and then I started using it too. And I guess I can say that at the same time as being skeptical about like, where is this going exactly, and wanting to be cautious. It's just the world. It's going to be the case that there's going to be a lot more software. There's going to be a lot more options, and there's also going to be more developer need, but that's another case. To come back to your question of like what makes it different, another aspect to this is that it doesn't. My experience is it doesn't seem like you're letting go of the task that you are in charge of. You have more perspectives on the task. Like I've learned more from Claude Code interactions about the products that I represent than I have in the last few years. Even though before that I was a customer. I mean, because it's a learning. It's not just a doing tool and a tool that you can like give to someone else, delegate out to. Your interactions with it actually surface all the information that you require. It's really hard to grasp at, and you can connect those dots as you need to as well. And so I just see this as like, okay, watch out, world, because this technology is for real. It is scary. There's a lot of, like I said, school data, student data. You don't want to just throw student data into an LLM, for example. And actually today I was spending time on harness that makes sure I don't do that, like even accidentally. So, I would take that very seriously. But yeah, so that's the difference. It's like, I'm learning more about Python, which I thought I was pretty good at. The aspects about the programming language that I use to do these tools. I'm learning more about that than I have in the last 6 months combined. And so I think that's what I would say is different.
And I like this idea that you bring up is that, yes, you knew Python, you've been coding for years, but suddenly now that you're interacting with Claude Code, it's almost like enhancing your own knowledge base and your own skills. And I like the way you put this idea that now you're putting the dots together that maybe might have taken longer, and it's getting you to maybe think about things that you would have not thought of because you might have been still kind of in the weeds trying to do the code. So it seems like it's not only an accelerator, but it's also an enhancer. And I think the enhancement part is what's really interesting. And I think that's maybe what, resonates for a lot of people. William, so if you listen to this and we call it a game changer, what's your thought that still needs to improve? What are the things when you hear that you're like, time out, we still need to do? Is there something that you think is still missing?
Yeah, so first about the game changer part, I don't believe it is a game changer in the sense that the real improvement came from improved LLMs, improved models. But the agents themselves are not a huge improvement. That's not a game changer. That's like a slow and logical evolution of what we already had. That's the natural evolution of the tools, which were the natural evolution of having LLMs that could spell out English sentences that made sense. So about the game changer, that's where I'm thinking, it's not a game changer, but that's for sure. That's an improvement on what we had before. But before really seeing it become a game changer, maybe the next iteration, I would think we need to find a better way to maintain the control over what the agent is doing internally. Doesn't mean that we need to be involved, but we need to find ways to ensure that there's control. And that includes like a clear way to assess areas where the LLM actually doesn't know, and it needs to know that it doesn't know. So it can self-assess when it needs to stop and rethink or ask for help, or this kind of thing, and not just hallucinate the missing details based on its own data set. And we need to have better way to accumulate knowledge that is specific to the domain that we want to tackle. The main issue we have still with the domain-specific knowledge is that we mostly use RAG. So basically, you have a big corpus of information that comes from your school, your company, your domain, and you put that in the query, and then the LLM will use that as a reference document or reference corpus to handle whatever query you ask it. And the answers should be very specific to your domain in that case. The problem with that way to ingest information is that it's very, very brittle. So you would need, first you need to have those like zero-day problem-solving skills that experts in the domain have. You need to have a way to phrase them in the document. But also ingesting that as English is not the best way. That we need to find ways to ingest that directly in the model. So you certainly heard about fine-tuning, for example. That's a way to ingest that. That's costly, but not as much as creating the model from scratch. But we need to have more research done in that area. I know that Anthropic made a huge leap last year that led to their newest Opus model in the way that they can like think in the middle of the process without having to spare anything as text. So there is work done, but there's still a big gap here to cross.
And I think that's important the way you're highlighting this gap where kind of we need to understand what's happening in the hood and we need to have some control. In other words, be able to look and hear and understand how it's going about it. Because as you said, you have the context, you keep bringing how important is context. And maybe the way we're doing it with language is maybe not the best way, English language, and find other ways that we can make those connections to really supervise, but also be part of that process. So it's a shared piece of work and it's not something that, you know, goes off, does it and delivers it. So thank you for that. I think that's really helpful. I think, Adam, you know, one of the things that we hear about in the press is that people are going to lose their jobs. You know, and a lot of it is hype, and there are a lot of other reasons people lose their jobs, and it doesn't always have to do with AI. I mean, we're in a geopolitical situation where a big resource is getting more expensive, so of course people might not be willing to hire new people, etc. There are a lot of different reasons. But do you think that as an organization, as a company, and in your role, do you see this actually making you become leaner as an organization, potentially long term? Or any organization. I don't need to point to your organization. I'm just saying, do you see, like, if you had to look in the crystal ball, like schools, let's just imagine you have 12 people in an HR department. Let's just imagine that. Yeah, you're a big school district or you're a big organization. Do you see, as agentic AI becomes more efficient and kind of has addressed the issues that William brought up and the humans in loop, is this hype actually somewhat real, or is this just we're misreading this?
Right, so I think the hype is real, unlike many other hype cycles I've been through. I do think that, you know, it's not a natural position for me at all. I don't want to be here unless it's like inevitable. But like this technology, like just to piggyback on what William was saying about some of the improvements made, and some of them were in the model, and some of them were in the technique, and that's where the answer to the question about jobs, because the technique with these agents isn't just about like hallucination and context pollution, which are two concepts that are relatively solved problems now.
Adam, I'm going to stop you there because I want to explain to people. Can you tell people hallucinations and context pollution, just so for people that might not know that term? Sorry to have interrupted you.
Oh, so exactly. What's hallucination? So if you're using an LLM, ChatGPT, and it sort of makes up a fact about it. That would be an example of a hallucination. It's the way the technology works that it will give a result, even if it doesn't have that piece of data in its knowledge base, so to speak. So context pollution is related to that, where you have a certain amount of memory. Every operation in computer has a certain limited amount of memory, a lot of RAM, or it's just raw silicon it can use to keep data inside. And so when that's very small, it's not very good at finding data. But when it's very large, it's very good at finding that piece of data. And so you have to solve both those problems in order to get good results, dependable results. And so those are the two aspects to using LLM that have been more or less solved for. So to go back to the question, well, what about how does that impact jobs? I see more software in this world. I see more people being able to interact with software in a way that is able to create and connect to other systems more easily. So I see that as being more jobs, maybe with less technical proficiency than required before, but there's going to be a lot of activity surrounding these kinds of flows that we're discussing today. So maybe the jobs that are the jobs that we will worry about are the ones that can be replicated by an automated process, but the person that's doing that has the domain knowledge, that what William was saying before, has the domain knowledge to etch into stone for the LLM and to become the supervisor for that same process. And not just that process, but connected processes, which is what I'm seeing. I'm not hired as a developer, but I'm able to build and develop through code in my job without impacting my regular requirements. So that's sort of what I see happening. I'm working in a school as an IT person, just about jobs again. I was often advocating for schools to have like an IT specialist available in-house. And that 5 years ago, that meant having a programmer, someone who knew how to write code. But now we don't need someone who knows how to write code. They just need someone who's able to explain analytic skills. It's a technical role. It's analytical, it's logical. There's a deep dive that you need to do, but these LLMs can help you with that. So that's how I see the job being. It's more about being a lot more supervisors over more software and things like that. So yeah, that's how I see it.
Thank you. And I think that's interesting is because so often we think it's just going to replace. And what I'm hearing you're saying yes, it might replace some low-level tasks, but you as a human being or in that role, you're going to be supervising not only what it delivers, but the connections that are associated with that delivery, be it in a department, a school, or even a teacher. If you're getting lessons generated by an agent, you're still going to have to think about the assessments and the rubrics, and you have different kids with different needs. So there's still that knowledge base is going to be super important. Maybe all your PowerPoints are done by Agentic AI, and really, is it that important, us spending hours worrying about font and looks? Yeah, some people like it. I get it. But really, wouldn't it be better if that was done and then we could really think, okay, I have these kids, they struggle with this concept, these kids struggle with that concept, and really supervising all the output and saying, based on that, this is where I'm going to go next. So I think that's a really interesting idea. William, if we have school leaders and non-technical listeners, what's the most smartest and most careful way you would encourage them to explore agentic AI without rushing into it? What would you, if you had to say to somebody, you should really think about these agents, and for somebody that knows nothing about it, or a school leader is listening to this, or a teacher, and they're thinking, I might need to go and look at that. What was something you would suggest how to approach that?
Before talking about that, maybe I would my turn to piggyback on what Adam said.
Yes,
about,
of course, absolutely, yeah.
So Adam was talking about many more people will be developing software, and I really think that's going to happen. My worry is that it will also lead to very low power software being released to production and then creating, it's a heaven, it's paradise for hackers. But the positive side of that is that you have more, and you already have more and more people who can quickly produce, without deep understanding of the technical side of software engineering, tools that are used, that are super useful, that are used by schools or by companies to, for example, to solve a single problem. And you wouldn't want to spend too much time to solve a single problem. If you can have a system automating this kind of tasks, then it's great. And the risk is very low as well. So I can see that already happening where, okay, you need a chatbot quickly built. Oh, no problem. You need a spreadsheet to be way more clever than just formula. You need to have some code running in the background and reacting to what's happening in the spreadsheet and feeding information in the spreadsheet based on other things. Well, you can build that with LLMs with very minimal risk, as long as you have somebody overseeing globally the process. So that's what's happening around me. For example, I focus on big platforms, building huge platforms with higher risk, but this is not what people actually see. What they see is those thousands of little tools that make their life easier, and these can be built quickly. But this is also just related to LLMs and not specifically agentic AI.
Yes,
For agentic AI, I would think you can start with what it's really good at. Pulling information from 1,000 different sources that speak a different language and somehow understanding, summarizing, planning actions based on everything that was read. Could be your SIS, could be Google, it could be websites, it could be all sorts of things. And then you can have alerts being sent, you can have reports being regenerated. Don't let it take actions that would be too costly to repair. So don't send emails to parents, these kind of things. But for example, internal emails are a lower bar. You can put, you can have any kind of documentation that you have in your school. It could be your academic corpus, could be your administrative SOPs. Put that there and then use the agent to retrieve information wherever something happens to make sure that it's happening according to the SOPs.
Yeah.
And more generally speaking, all of this, as Adam also mentioned, must happen without any personally identifiable information being leaked to anywhere, any model, any company outside of your school. But there's a very, very good way to trial these kind of processes in your school. You can install local LLMs. Now, customer-grade hardware to run those LLMs are pretty cheap. There are a lot of models that are available that are multimodal, so they can understand text, they can understand pictures. You can run them locally without sending any information anywhere. Everything stays on your network and on your server. And you just go crazy with ideas. And the best way to go crazy is to open it to your computer science class. And you ask the students to come up with ideas, and they will come up with ideas.
That's a great way.
That could be part of your computer science curriculum, of your mathematics curriculum. I'm really an advocate of teaching linear algebra and everything that those neural networks are based on early enough so they can get a taste and later, because clearly that's the future. They can be ready for it when they go to university. And you can fine tune. You can have those kids fine tune image models, text models based on whatever corpus they think would be useful. Yeah, I think that's a good way to start.
Those are great ideas. And I love also how you're bringing in the kids as part of the process through the computer science and really getting them to engage. And I think your point again, and depending where you are in the world, so in Europe, we have the EU AI Act. In Switzerland, we have the Federal Data Protection Act. So you also have to be very mindful in your geographic setting and your school setting, what the rules are about that. And, you know, some educators are using Google Workspace for Education Gemini, which has a different type of privacy than the commercial version, and same with Microsoft Copilot. So really be very clear in understanding those dynamics as you work with this. And I think William highlighted that multiple times. And I think that's really important that, and Adam mentioned it too, that this idea of privacy and personal information be very clear on the red line with that. We're coming to the end of the podcast, and I'm just curious, Adam, what do you think we should, you know, not, and you actually in your blog and your writing, you're always talking kind of about the future and some of your reflections of what happened. What would you want educators and school leaders just to keep in the back of their head, because things are changing very fast. Everything is accelerating at a high speed. And of course, you're in a context of a big organization. You're creating softwares that multiple users are using. So there's a different game that you have to engage with. But let's just imagine as a school, what would be something you would want school leaders and teachers just to be very clear about what this agentic AI might mean for them here?
Yeah, sure. And first of all, they were probably struggling a bit, understand, they feel overwhelmed, confused, scared. And I'm someone who I'm capable of learning these tools on my own because I have a background that I have, but I also find it the same. I'm also I went through a period of time where I was just like, oh my gosh, really? Is this really what we're going to be doing now? This AI slop. But when you use it to its appropriately, for example, if every teacher has a stash of slides or activities that they've kind of hoarded over many years, they can put that in an LLM and they will be able to get a summary and better versions of those very easily and quickly. And these are the sort of getting started things that will show anyone what the big deal is about agentic AI. And I think that's the key thing is we work in education, and we have a tool. I mean, think about YouTube as a tool for learning that introduced when it came out, or iPads when they came out. It took schools a while to adopt it, understandably, because we're cautious, and that's our default position, and for good reason. But there's now a tool that's even more democratized than YouTube, or more democratized than we've seen before, and you're able to sift through information better, quicker, easier. It's a learning platform available, so pick it up. It's a tool to be used. It's taking the world by storm for good reason. I can't believe I'm here saying this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I don't know what else can you say, right? So yeah, it's a learning tool is what I want everyone to remember most.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. And as you said in your anecdote, how using Claude Code, you're actually learning more. It's almost like it's pushing you to new understandings and new capacities, and also your skills, the new set of skills that you're engaging with as you address that. Thank you. William, what are your thoughts on kind of, a little line of advice to educators and school leaders regarding agentic AI?
Yeah. Take it for what it is. It's a huge, amazing evolution of a mathematical tool, a statistical tool. LLMs are amazing. There is enough to be amazed about here without having to go ride the hype wave with the agents. These tools are just like, I don't know, Photoshop and Microsoft Paint. Yes, you can use Microsoft Paint to edit photos. Would you? You use the best tools and the most advanced tools. And now we have those tools that are evolving really quickly. Why not use them? But we need to keep in mind, just like any other tool, the limitations. So we know what to expect to go wrong and when to expect it, and the cost of those errors. And that's the major thing with agents. Keep in mind the cost of errors when you are using the tool. Otherwise, it's amazing. It's like a balancing act. You have great powers and you need to use it responsibly.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
and I think that line that you just said, we have these new great powers and we have to be responsible. The Center for Humane Technology always says, with new technologies come new responsibilities. And I just love that, because I think both of you are saying, this is amazing, but let's also be very balanced and understand what that is. And I think the point that has been brought up throughout the podcast is also, be very clear when things go wrong. What are we going to do? What are we going to mitigate? And where do you use it where maybe there's a higher risk of error or something going wrong, and not use it for that, and where the lower? And so really understanding with this, there are risks. And unfortunately, maybe the risks are even bigger, because if you have something that's off doing things on its own, it might be very late before you understand things have gone wrong. So I think that is a really important caution. I just want to remind our audience, the show notes, both William and Adam are available. They have their LinkedIn, they have some websites there. Go and pop over there and look at their work. I know they're both always willing to chat, so you can reach out to them. Both of them are involved with schools, so they have a lot of expertise in the school space, but also both have companies, so they're also working in the non-academic environment. So I think don't hesitate to reach out. And for us, we want to thank you again for the feedback, and those of you that said we need to maybe talk about agentic AI. We could go on forever. This is a huge topic. You're going to keep hearing about it. And of course, there's the hype. Companies are going to be hyping this, and there's going to be the scary stories and the stories that make the front page. But at the end, I think as educators, it's about being cautious, really thinking about it, be critical thinkers, and knowing that it's not a race. It's about making sure it makes sense, and that is at the end of the day, the students at the front, that this is about students, or it's about your people that you have in your organization. So thank you again, Adam and William, for your time. We look forward to catching up with you at our next podcast. And again, reach out through LinkedIn. Many of you do that. Go to the LinkedIn page, International Schools Podcast. People are asking, questioning, giving comments, and also, of course, encouraging us on certain topics. So that's the best place to reach us, and we appreciate your continued support. And if you like what you hear, feel free to just drop a little review at one of your favorite podcast platforms. But in the meantime, thank you again, Adam and William, for your time and your expertise today.
Thank you very much.
Have a good time. Thank you.